I've gotten very interested in crowdfunding. I think it's got the potential to democratize access to ventures in a way that we don't have now. So venture capital now, I think, has been captured by a set of institutions, private equity partnerships and so forth, and yet and much of the large gains to, let's say, to Apple and Facebook and so forth went to a few institutions that were investing in venture capital. Now we have the ability to have websites where you and I could go and invest, $2,000 or $3,000 and then participate possibly in the next big Facebook. I think this is a fantastic thing, but it threatens existing institutional structures. Because of that, ever since the beginning of sort of a crowdfunding approach, there has been a resistance to this, to democratizing access to innovation and growth. I mentioned this. I see it as bringing in new investors, allowing new enterprises to develop, creating a new model for governance, collective capital, and that involves distributing the control of these ventures. One of the big innovations in financial history is the creation of the corporation, and with it, permanent capital that can be traded on an exchange. I showed you a bond exchange before. This is a picture of a Dutch East Indies company boat, and the crowdfunding feature of it was the broad sale of shares amongst many Dutch investors. What they made possible was also a sharing in the risks associated with that. So when we think of equity corporations that emerged during the late 1600s and early 1700s, they were oftentimes connected to international trade. So a way of capitalizing ventures that required quite a bit of an investment to build boats and so forth, but as well, boats that might not come back. I'm going to show you another side, which I think is also, I would argue is equally socially beneficial to international, as opposed to international trade, which is equity funding of an early corporation in Toulouse in the 13th century. So, and this is just part of my personal research. Here is from the Nuremberg Chronicles, which has great pictures of cities. Here is Toulouse and La Vie Rose. And over on the left-hand side, what looks like a bridge is actually a mill that water would flow through, and it would turn big millstones. This was the earliest recorded corporate organization. It had limited liability, it had a board structure, it had a rotating board structure, it had external accounting, it had one shareholder, one vote, as opposed to one share, one vote. Many different features of it argue that it was an early corporation. I told you that some of my personal research is about this. The feature that I've spent some time on is collecting the prices, and I do this with two other economists in Toulouse. They've spent the time collecting the data, so I'm taking credit for it today. But collecting the prices and the dividends for this company that it goes back another couple of hundred years, but we have excellent data from about 1500 or so. And there are two lines here. One line is the price level of the shares, and so that's all the way over here, 6,000 livres tournois, which is quite a sum of money. They weren't cheap shares. And then the dividends on this side. So here's a picture with a rolling average where you can see that over the long term, prices and dividends for this company move together. in quite a rational way. As the dividends go up, the prices go up. And to make a long story short, you might want to know what the long-term rate of return on this oldest living company is. It lived up until the French nationalized it in 1946. The rate of return was about 5% real return per year. Now, that's a company that survived a whole lot, but nevertheless, it's kind of nice to know what the expectation was and what the realization was through that time. These shares were actively traded as well, and eventually the company got listed on the Paris bourse. Although it was nationalized, the French also have recently spun off part of their electrical company, which is what now is hydroelectricity, is the raison d'etre for this firm. And so now you could go back and buy a little bit of this ancient firm if you wanted.